Welcome back to the California Conversation. I'm Tess Abraham. A recent investigation uncovered that California has been spending hundreds of millions of dollars to provide iPads to prisoners, devices that have been used, of course, to access sexually explicit content and to commit further crimes. Yes, the money that your government takes from you has been spent to provide criminals with disgusting forms of entertainment and access to young girls, including inmates who are on death row. The lengths that our state government will go to waste the money that we give them and not use it efficiently or for our benefit at all never ceases to amaze me. And when it starts to put real people at risk, that's when it just goes too far. So what exactly happened? We're going to break it all down today. But before we get started, make sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so that you stay up to date on all things California politics. And this show wouldn't be possible without our amazing brand partners, just like We Heart Nutrition. We Heart Nutrition is a family-owned supplement company that is focused on giving you high-quality, research-backed products with clean ingredients and no unnecessary fillers. Plus, 10% of every purchase goes towards supporting pregnancy pro-life centers across the United States. They are pro-family, pro-baby, pro-life, and American-made, which you just couldn't want more in your supplement company. So use my discount code TESSABRAHAM or shop through my link below to get 20% off your order and to support the show. So we have talked a lot over the last several weeks about California's primary election. We've talked about candidates for governor. We've talked about why it's important to vote. I've tried to plead with Democrat voters to switch their vote to someone like Steve Hilton. But at the same time, there is still so much happening across California politics. There are still laws that are being introduced. There are bad laws that are in place. And there are investigations that are uncovering fraud, waste, abuse, and criminal activity in our state government. And so we need to completely switch today. No more election content for a while. And we need to instead focus on a story that broke last month that I believe it is incredibly important that we are informed on and leads to a greater, broader conversation about our state policies in general. What is this story? Well, investigative journalist Chris Rufo interviewed several inmates who are on death row in California prisons. And what he uncovered is that prisoners are able to exploit a system that was put in place by our state a few years ago, several years ago, in order to commit further crimes and to promote some very heinous activities. So let's back up. What is this program? Well, all the way back in 2017, California piloted the idea of giving out free tablets to inmates in state prisons. And they started small. They started with, I believe, 5 prisons across the state. But of course, that took off and skyrocketed. And so by 2021, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, who I will be referring to as CDCR from here on out because that is too long, they rolled it out statewide. And so nearly 90,000 free tablets given out at absolutely no cost to the inmates. Those tablets have been handed out to prisoners in state prisons, and that has cost our state $189 million spread over the 4 years of the program. And then those contracts have been extended, and so it's looking this year like it's going to increase the cost to $315 million. Now, what is the purpose behind this? What sparked this? Why do we need to be giving tablets to prisoners? The idea is something called digital equity. I know. I'm going to lose you there. What could digital equity be? Proponents argue that this is the idea that prisoners deserve access to technology as a matter of their civil rights. And so they try to cite several different reasons as to why technological access is a civil right. They say that, one, it can connect prisoners with their families, and that there are studies that show that those who have kept family connections are less likely to commit crimes in the future. They also say that they can access rehabilitative materials. They can take courses and better themselves. And so they need these tablets in order to be able to do that. And then they also need to be prepared technologically, because if any of them are let out of prison at some point, they're going to enter a very technological world. And so they should stay up to date in prisons. And the language around this program It would be funny if it wasn't so corrupt as to what they were trying to do with brainwashing us into spinning this as a positive thing. But they use terms like what I just said of digital equity. They also refer to prisoners as justice impacted individuals. So they don't want to just say taxpayer funded iPads. They know that that doesn't sound great. And they also don't want to say criminals because they want you to feel empathy. They want you to feel bad for these people who are in prison because they have committed crimes. And the CDCR has gone so far as to defend this by even invoking access to the Bible, which I would like to inform CDCR, Bibles are printed and there's a lot of them in America, so we can hand out physical Bibles to every inmate. I think that'd be a great idea. They don't need a tablet. But they like to cite that because they know that the people who are against it are often conservatives or going to be religious people. So they like to say, well, they have to have access to the Bible. They also like to claim that the access to these tablets is monitored. So the prisoners are given these tablets, but they say that certain things are restricted. They can't just go on the internet and search up whatever they want to. And even though they have a set amount of free texting and calling, if it goes past a certain limit, then they are charged. And so they would, in theory, need to be a little bit more careful with how they're going to use that time. But while all of this sounds positive, maybe it sounds positive to some, we have to look at what actually happened because it doesn't take a rocket scientist to tell you that it's probably not a good idea to give murderers and pedophiles and rapists access to electronic devices that do have the internet on them, even if they're not supposed to be able to access it, and access to the outside world. So what actually happened as part of this program? Well, surprise, surprise, inmates have used the tablets to receive very explicit photos and videos, and specific instances has been cited of nude images, sexually explicit video chats, and pornography. So again, really not surprising that criminals, that people who are in prison for often heinous crimes are going to use literally anything given to them. Doesn't even have to be an iPad, would use anything to access more heinous material. So per interviews with inmates, Chris Rufo found that many inmates admit they have found several workarounds to all of CDCR's monitoring. So they say that they can bypass any of the security filters very easily, which has given them access to young girls. It's given them access to minors. It's let them into chat rooms. And then on top of that, they've also gotten creative with several workarounds because they have access to video calling. That's something that they're allowed to do with these tablets. Well, if you video call someone, then it doesn't take a genius to understand that the person on the other side of the call can put images or can put videos or can put content in front of the screen for them to watch together. And that is exactly what several inmates have admitted to doing specifically with regards to pornographic content. So the money that you give our government is being used to, one, purchase electronic devices for criminals, two, allow those criminals to have access to disgusting and debased purposes, whether it's committing a further crime or just access to explicit material that no one should have access to. And then three, allowing them to do it really without any restriction or consequence. That should absolutely outrage every single taxpayer in California. That is unacceptable that our government is facilitating that. But as if that wasn't bad enough, it actually gets worse. How could it get worse, you might be asking? Well, I've alluded to committing further crimes. What do I mean by that? Let's take the case of Nathaniel Diaz. This is a case that came to the surface and was being investigated federally because Nathaniel Diaz was in Avenal State Prison, which is up in Kings County. He was originally imprisoned for committing lewd acts against a minor. So basically, he is a known child predator and sex offender. He was given a tablet. Not a great start, not a great idea. And again, to no one's surprise, he used that tablet to actually go and communicate with his victim. So the girl that he was put in prison because he was abusing, he reached out to, he re-engaged in grooming activities. He talked on the phone with her thousands of times. He maintained hours daily of contact with her, even though he had been given a 10-year no contact order from the court at the time of his sentencing. And he also coerced her into sending him explicit images. So he went right back to the crimes that he was put in prison for, and he continued to victimize this poor girl, which, as you can imagine, being a parent of a young child, you would think that if the person who hurt your child was put in prison, you would think now that child is going to be safe. You could breathe a little bit easier. He is put away. He's going to be there for years. He cannot contact her. And so we can all take a deep breath. Everything's going to be okay. How horrified would you be to find out that this prisoner was able to contact your child once again? And so she's not safe. She's not safe from him being in prison because our state just gives them electronic access and ability to contact their victims. Does this sound like something that you want your tax dollars to be funding, to be going toward? Does this sound like it is a good use of government money, that it fulfills the purposes of what prison is, it fulfills the purposes of what government is supposed to do, and fulfills the purpose of what tax revenue is supposed to be going toward? Now, a former deputy director of California's adult parole operations stated to Chris Rufo in his investigation that, quote, "I would bet my pension that there's a vast amount of childhood pornography on these tablets. There are probably several thousand children that are currently being groomed." That is a horrifying thought, to think that we are allowing more and more victims to be created from our prison system, a prison system that is designed to get criminals off the street and out of society, that instead our children are not safe because they can be reached out to, they can be victimized, they can be groomed from prison, that there are criminals right now who are thinking up schemes and workarounds of how to get to your child, and that they are doing it on devices that we literally pay for. We are paying for them to blackmail, to extort, to coerce, and to abuse our children. That sickens me, and that should sicken you. But here's the thing. I've continued to say this isn't surprising, and it's not, because this is a consequence of a justice system that in California is a complete joke. It's been trampled on for years. Policy after policy and law after law that has been passed has continued to dismantle true justice, redefine what justice means, and reshuffle who is really a victim, who is innocent, who should be protected, and who we are responsible for, both as a government and as the taxpayer. So everything in California, every process, every policy that has been passed serves as proof that our state and our state's leadership does not understand what justice is, and it has completely perverted the idea of justice. What are some examples of this? Well, Chris Rufo gives great examples in his report. He cites the fact that Gavin Newsom came into office and shortly after he was elected as governor, halted all executions. He placed a moratorium on executions. And it has been 20 years since the death penalty has actually been enforced or carried out here in California. Additionally, death row inmates were moved. So instead of just being in a specific place because they are on death row, they're supposed to be heading toward execution. That's their sentence because of how bad their crime was. Instead, they have been redispersed throughout state prisons and let back into the general population. And so instead of having hardened criminals, again, like murderers and rapists, having to be in isolation for 20 plus hours per day and having to be separated from other human beings because of what they have done, they are just dispersed back into being able to have access to things like tablets and call their families and access the internet and do pretty much whatever they want in the general population of prisons. And then San Quentin, which was one of the oldest and most notorious correctional facilities in California, it had death row, and it was turned by Gavin Newsom's administration into a rehabilitation facility. So instead of having all of the different cells and solitary confinement that they are supposed to be held in, instead it was turned into classrooms. They have podcast studios, and they even have a public cafe. And Gavin Newsom went so far as to say that his goal was to make what was formerly death row a, quote, positive healing environment. So do you see the pattern here? This program is just the digital arm of a much broader effort to treat actual convicted criminals, convicted murderers, rapists, child predators, as a marginalized population who is deserving of state funds in order to improve their quality of life as they have to deal with being incarcerated, as they are justice impacted individuals. But that is not the point of prison. Prison is not supposed to be comfortable. It's not supposed to be easy. It's not supposed to be something that barely impacts your quality of life. Prison is punishment. It's punishment for crime because you committed crimes under the law that have hurt people, that have hurt real people. And there have to be consequences from that. And so we have to separate you from society. And that means that you shouldn't have access to the things that you once had access to that you showed you actually can't handle. You can't handle having access to electronics because when you were out in society, you used them to groom children. Okay, so you lose access to those things. You were once able to talk to your family 24/7 because you lived with them at home, but you committed crimes. Potentially you were abusive. You were a dangerous person. So you actually don't get to talk to them anymore. That's a punishment. That's a consequence for your actions. That is the purpose of prison. Prison is supposed to be able to enact justice by protecting victims, not to make sure that you leave a comfortable and very happy life and that you can almost forget that you're even in prison and you can just go about your day and text who you want and call who you want. I'm sorry, no. Meanwhile, there are Californians who are struggling to pay rent, to find an affordable place to live, to buy their groceries, struggling because they can't go out and walk on the street at night because they don't feel safe, struggling because they don't know how they're supposed to picture raising a family in a state that just continually jacks up prices of things, that continues to tax them year after year after year. That is who is actually struggling while our state is spending enormous amounts of money upgrading the digital experience of prisoners. Prisoners who should not have a digital experience because that is not a civil right. That is not a basic human right that needs to be upheld when you are in prison. It is so not justice. It's a completely inverted view of what justice is. A story like this can feel niche. It can feel kind of amusing, obviously sad, and it can feel like it doesn't really impact you that much. We know our state spends money. We know that our state is going to crap. So what does it really matter if California is handing out iPads to prisoners? But this impacts you on several levels. The first level, and most obvious one, is just the financial level. Because every time our government spends money on one thing, that means the money can't go to another place. So if a government decides to expand and have more and more and more programs that it needs funding for, that means that it has to raise additional revenues to be able to continue putting money toward those programs, as well as putting money toward the basic necessities of running and governing a society. And so if government doesn't strip away to make sure that it is only funding the bare necessities, if it continues to add, that means it's going to have to continue to look for ways to raise revenues. And the way that it does that in California, most obviously, is through taxes. And so you continue to have taxes and fees just imposed on you again and again and again because it has a massive spending problem. And so every single dollar counts. They should not take $1 more from you than they absolutely need. And yet they do, because they don't need to be giving tablets to prisoners. That is not at all a need. And there are so many programs in our government. I mean, our government is so bloated that are not needs, but they are doing that. And so that impacts you on just a basic financial level. They are using their money in a way that is mismanagement, in a way that is often abused and fraudulent, and in a way that does not directly relate to their responsibility and role as government. Government spending is not free. They are always spending money that was earned by someone else. Then it, of course, impacts you on a public safety level because, like I said, we thought that when criminals were put away, when criminals were put into prison, that we were going to be safe. But now we see that there are actual cases that is not the case because criminals are able to continue reaching out to children, continue grooming them, continuing to access materials that exploit people and that hurt people. Let me just say it again. Prisoners are put in prison because they cannot operate in society. So we should not let them operate in society, even digitally. Criminals hurt real individuals, real children, real families. And oftentimes they hurt them permanently. They kill people. They destroy lives. They destroy futures. That means that they have to give up. They have to have privileges taken away from them. Because you cannot just do whatever you want in society, including hurting other people or just breaking the law, and then expect that you're going to have all of the same freedoms that you once did. No. If we are going to deter further crime, and if we are going to actually get justice for victims of crime, then we have to say no. But our state's not saying no. And so this is going to mean that crime is just further incentivized because people know that they're not actually going to incur some sort of severe punishment for what they do. So that impacts your public safety. And two, they can still reach you from prison. But most importantly, this impacts you on a moral level. The conversation is not just about the state budget. The conversation is not just even about the purpose of prisons. This is a conversation about what we as a society believe is right and wrong, who we believe are the innocent that need to be defended, and who are the guilty and how they ought to be punished. Every single law, every single policy reflects a value system. And in California, these laws and these policies reflect a value system that says they care more about the comfort and the well-being and the livelihood of people who are committing crimes rather than protecting the law-abiding citizens that they have a duty to. It is their primary responsibility as a government to protect the majority of the people that are under their care who are abiding by the law, and to punish the evildoer to, again, deter that further and future crime. This is a moral issue. True justice requires our state to remember who the innocent one is. Their first concern needs to be for victims and their families, as well as preventing future victims and future victimized families, rather than having their first concern even with something like rehabilitation. There is a place for that. There is a place for compassion. But if your compassion is going to become so untethered from true justice, then it ceases to be compassion. It ceases to actually be about rehabilitation. And that just becomes a code word for, we want to give you whatever you want, and we want to apologize that you're even in prison in the first place. Our state has completely forgotten who the innocent one is, and they have forgotten what their duty is as our government. That is immoral, and we should never be content with that. And so here's the thing. Here is the important part about investigations like this. Investigations uncover things. And when things are uncovered, then you know them. So now we know. We know that our government is doing this. We know how it's being mismanaged, how it's being abused, how it's being used to perpetuate further crime. And so once you know something, you have to ask yourself, is this the kind of justice system that I want to support? Is this the kind of leadership that I want to be in power? And if not, what can I do about it? And so a couple of practical things here. First, stay informed. That is exactly what we are doing. Thank you for being here and watching this video. That's why I have this podcast. Most people do not know what is going on in their government. Most people don't care. Most people don't think about the policies and laws that are being passed. And so that is why these acts are allowed to continue. That's why laws are allowed to be passed without any sort of repercussion, is because people just don't understand. And so we need to be informed. We need to bring these things into the light. And that means that once they're in the light, then we know that we have a duty to elect leaders who actually have a correct view of justice. And I know for those of you who watch this show regularly, I don't have to tell you that we need to elect better leaders. You want to do that. We're trying to do that. That's why the November election matters so much. But that should compel us to not give up on the steps in front of us. That should compel us to not just throw up our hands and say California's too far gone, because we still have a duty to do the right thing here. And the right thing is to vote for people and to champion people and to go out and speak up for people who are actually going to flip what California originally flipped around, which means to restore what true justice looks like. And so that leads to 3, speaking up, having conversations, because like I said, most people don't know. So talk to people in your church, talk to people in your family, talk to people in your immediate circle of friends, and just have rational conversations, not looking for a debate, but hey, did you know that this is happening? one of the reasons I started this podcast is because I learned about some of the laws in our state that were deeply disturbing and troubling to me. And my first question is, why didn't I know about this? And I didn't know about it because it's not front page news. It's not something that's flashy. New laws aren't just popping up on X every day saying California just did this, California just did that. And so it's easy for these things to be dismissed. It's easy for investigations like this to just be one headline that eventually gets dropped and nobody cares about it. So we need to make sure that the people around us know the weight of why it is so important that we engage in our government, and know why it's important to be informed, and know why it's important to show up to vote. So we need to continue having those conversations. Lastly, as I continually say here, do not become cynical, because problems we see are created by policy choices. And that means that problems can be fixed by policy choices, but it takes work. It takes work. And that means we have to show up. We have to continue engaging. We have to continue voting. We have to continue being informed. We have to continue having those conversations, even when it all feels like it doesn't matter, even when it feels like it's rigged, even when it feels like we don't have influence in our state. Why? Because it's the right thing to do, because it does matter, because it does make a difference. Even if it's not on a statewide level, it does make a difference in communities. It makes a difference in churches. It makes a difference in you and me. It makes a difference in homes, in families. And so do not become cynical. Have hope for our state that if we continue fighting the good fight, we are going to push for change as long as there is a breath in our lungs. There is something deeply wrong with a state that is going to elevate the comfort and the convenience of convicted criminals while pushing to the side the voices of victims and the voices of innocent people who need to be protected from these criminals. And quite frankly, as conservatives, but mostly as Christians, we cannot be content with that happening. We have to continue speaking up against and about it. Because if you want a better future for your children in this state, and I want a better future for all of the children that are in this state, then we have to care about our justice system. We have to care about preserving what true justice is. And we also know that justice is not defined by the state. Justice is defined by God. It is defined in the Bible for us. And so we do not want the state, we're not going to let the state redefine what justice is. And the state, when it thinks that it is going to be more compassionate than God, it thinks that it's going to be so compassionate because it's going to love the criminal more. That's when we see that it starts to reorder its priorities, and suddenly we do not have justice at all. So none of this surprises us because we have the worldview, we have the Bible, we know what is true, and we see how mankind is completely going away, shifting away from what is good, right, and true. But we are compelled to continue to fight, to pull us back, to conserve us back to those values. We should never, and I will never, stop working for a California that will restore true biblical justice. And so just to wrap us up, I want to leave you with this final warning from the book of Isaiah. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness. Our leaders in California should take that warning incredibly serious because it speaks specifically to the circumstances that they have placed us in. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope it was helpful for you as you navigate life in our state and that it exposed a very wicked practice that is going on here in California. If you love this show, please spread the word and share it with your friends, family, and fellow Californians. And I'll see you back here next week for another episode of the California Conversation.